How does TB-500 affect the immune system? Did you know thymosin beta-4 is naturally made by your body's thymus gland? And it was something that was discovered at the Albert Einstein School of Medicine back in the 1960s, where Dr. Goldstein realized that these peptides that naturally exist from your thymus gland are responsible for informing many of the immune system processes in your body. So what I'm going to show you in this video is exactly what you can do to modulate or to reprogram your immune system. I'm going to share a case study with you of somebody who had chronic autoimmunity and inflammatory issues and how they used TB-500. And by the end of this video, you'll know exactly what you need to do to safely and effectively use TB-500 to optimize your immune function. So first of all, thymosin beta-4 is the molecule that naturally exists in your thymus gland and throughout every single tissue structure in your body. And it's often called TB-500. So why is it often called TB-500? Well, that's because it's a fragment of the full amino acid profile of TB-4. Now, TB-4 is known as an immune modulator. And if you think of modulation, you want to think of the ability for your body to upregulate certain pathways of the immune cells, like when you have this innate response where there's danger, you want to make sure that you've got the right immune cells active at that time. And then there's an adaptive immune response, which gives you more of a global long-term perspective on which proteins are safe, which ones may not be, what structures that have entered into the nasal cavity or through the oral cavity, what's dangerous, what's not dangerous. And what happens in the world that we live in today is there can be a lot of chaos when it comes to our immune health. And so thymosin beta-4 is not only a peptide for performance enhancement, but it also is this dual effect on the immune system. So here's some of the things that you want to consider. If you have a chronic autoimmune condition, so the way I got into functional medicine and natural medicine is I actually got really sick. I was in my undergraduate work at the University of Utah, and I started noticing that my skin was flared up. I had eczema that turned into psoriasis. My hair was thinning, and I was in my early 20s. I was gaining weight, and I didn't know why. I couldn't sleep at night, but I was so exhausted that it was hard for me to stay awake in my classes. I had brain fog that was so severe I could only study between about 7 p.m. to about 9 p.m. So I had 2 hours where I just cram and actually could learn the material. But every single doctor I went to, they said, everything looks great. Nothing's wrong with your labs, you're just too stressed. Now, I grew up on a cattle ranch in Idaho, and I was like, this is actually really fun. I enjoy school. Something's wrong. And so it was finally a friend of mine who sent me to a naturopathic doctor, and he ran the full labs for me, and he said, Regan, you've got an autoimmune condition. And he said, I don't know what triggered it, but your antibodies that relate to your thyroid, called thyroid peroxidase antibodies, are 680. They're out of control. And he said, have you ever been exposed to chemicals? And I was like, no, not really, just Roundup. And so he's like, Roundup? And I said, yeah. I used to spray the riverbanks with Roundup. We would spray it everywhere. We'd dip fence posts in formaldehyde. I worked in the potato fields, a lot of chemicals there. And he said, that could be what is triggering this. And so instead of just dismissing me and saying, oh, you don't have any issues, he actually found the underlying cause, and then we started reversing that. And after about a year, my health was so improved that I changed my trajectory. I went to a school in Hawaii and studied more integrated medicine, learned Eastern and Western medicine, and then I founded East West Health 21 years ago because of the progress that I've made. Now, if I would have had access to thymosin beta-4, it would have taken me far less effort, far less time, and it would have been a lot more effective if I had this in my protocol, which I didn't. I just learned about thymosin beta-4 11 years ago, and it's been something that's been incredibly helpful for our clients at East West Health for their autoimmune condition. And so if you're somebody who struggles with poor sleep, you have anxiety, you notice that you have a lot of pain systemically, maybe you too have had your thyroid looked at and it's been diagnosed as maybe you've got some autoimmunity. And that could be either Graves or Hashimoto's. And a lot of times we see people with Hashimoto's, they end up with Graves, and then it's like this teeter-totter. But when you talk about immune modulation, what we want to do is stabilize the immune response so that your immune system has more intelligence. Because the way that it worked in my body, when I was exposed to all the glyphosate, and many of you, if you're wondering, do I have glyphosate toxicity? Well, there's a simple test that we can do. It's a urine test, and we can show you the levels of glyphosate in your system. All you need to do is go to agelessfuture.com and then fill out the form there, and one of my team members will get in touch with you and help you get the right tests and the right diagnostics so we can point you in the right direction. For those of you who maybe you don't have these symptoms, you may know somebody who does, or you may want to prevent issues in the future, because one of the things that happens as we age is we have what's called immunosenescence. And so that's where our immune cells, they lose their intelligence, and that lineage of cells, maybe that, one of your white blood cells, it doesn't repopulate itself. And so our white blood cell count starts to drop, and then you'll see lymphocytes get elevated if you have a viral infection, or maybe your neutrophils are elevated because there's some kind of bacterial infection or fungal infection. But when you get the right tests, then you can say, all right, well, how do I remodulate this and prevent any future disease? And that's what we're going to talk about in this video today. So Thymosin beta-4. When I say Thymosin beta-4, I'm also including TB-500, but we do like to use Thymosin beta-4 in most cases. And so Thymosin beta-4, it lowers IL-6, which is a pro-inflammatory marker. You'll find it in the brains of people who have had TBIs or traumatic brain injuries. You'll find it elevated in people who've had heart attacks. You'll find it elevated when your blood sugar's off balance. Even for you endurance athletes, which I know there's a lot on this channel, a lot of you that watch this, you do the extreme sports, which I love, but you'll even find IL-6 levels are very high after you've ran that marathon or maybe done the Spartan Beast or whatever crazy exercise you're into. The other marker that gets elevated is called TNF-alpha, or tumor necrosis factor alpha, and that's a molecule that can cause us to age even quicker, and it can dysregulate the immune response. So how does this all come into play? Well, there's this gland called the thymus gland. It's right here on your sternum. And one thing you can do is you can do just a little tapping on your thymus gland. And when you tap that, and you tap right in the center of your sternum, right to the outside of it, under your clavicle, what you can do is activate your body's own immune system and immune cells. And it actually is really powerful. I'll do this when I fly. Try not to do it next to the passenger, but if you're ever flying with me, I apologize if I'm activating my immune system and I'm using like glutathione nasal sprays and oregano and NAD. I just want to make sure that I'm protected, because I do fly a lot and I do enjoy traveling, but I do it more because of the work that I do. So Thymosin beta-4, one thing that it does is it causes the migration of what are called T cells in throughout your body. And then these T cells and macrophages can isolate the intruder or isolate the agent or the pathogen. We'll just call it pathogen would be anything that's not supportive to your body matrix and your immune matrix. And so when you have T cells and macrophages, the T cells help isolate the threat, and then the macrophages surround it, and then they go to a process called autophagy where they'll eat up that pathogen and then discard of it. So if you have adequate immune function, and when you're using something like Thymosin beta-4, you can do it as an injection. And when you inject it, we'll have a very specific dosing for you, a very specific protocol. We only use compounding pharmacies that are licensed through the FDA at 503A or 503B compounding pharmacies. And then what we'll do on the flip side is we'll also see what other agents might be helpful to remodulate your immune system. One of the things we found very beneficial is when you combine Thymosin beta-4 with Thymosin alpha-1. And what that does is it not only helps trigger that T cell and macrophage activation, but it also helps increase your body's own white blood cell count. Or if your white blood cells are too high, it helps bring it down and stabilize it. So Thymosin beta-4, one of the interesting things we had with one of our clients is she had multiple chemical sensitivities. Anytime there was perfume, she actually sat in a new car once and she said she got so sick for about 2 weeks because it exhausted her immune system. Her immune system looked at everything as a threat, and she got to the place where she couldn't even be around her family. She couldn't be around anybody who wore perfume. When she would come into the office, we would have to make sure that nobody wore perfume that day. And if a client walked in with perfume, we'd have to ask them to go wash it off. And it was challenging because we all want to smell good, but some of these fragrances, if you just get rid of fragrances and make that the first thing that you do for your detoxification, you'll help create stronger immunity. So what we did with her is we had her on Thymosin alpha-1, Thymosin beta-4, we did stem cell IVs, and what we noticed is over the course of about 2 years, she went from being reactive to everything to being able to come into the office. And this is no disrespect, but a lot of my elderly ladies, you wear a lot of perfume. And it's great, but it wasn't supportive for her. But I remember the one day when one of my clients, and I love her to death, but she wore a lot of perfume. She was in the office right before this patient with multiple chemical sensitivity showed up, and there was no complaints. She didn't have a panic attack. There was no anxiety. There was no heavy breathing. Her immune system had now remodulated itself and calmed down. And so for those of you who do struggle with some of these same issues and you're looking to really boost your body's own immune intelligence, Thymosin beta-4 might be the right fit for you. So one of the studies on Thymosin beta-4 is where they looked at patients with MS or multiple sclerosis. Now this is published in Science Direct, and we'll provide a link in the show notes for you. But what they found is that the thymosins, not only did they describe the overall mechanism of action, they talked about Thymosin beta-4 and Thymosin alpha-1 and how to use those in conjunction with patients who had MS. And what they found is that the state-of-the-art use of these peptides on MS, they found that they were able to downregulate some of that reactivity of the myelin sheath. They found that it was neuroprotective, especially the Thymosin beta-4 seemed to be very neuroprotective. And so they found the lesions in the brain actually shrunk or at least stayed the same when using these molecules. And they found that the Thymosin alpha-1 actually created better temperature variations, because a lot of times with MS, getting into an environment where it's really hot, that can trigger that reaction. And so in looking at the studies and looking at the future, I think Thymosin beta-4, Thymosin alpha-1, these are going to be very powerful treatments that can help us live as long and healthy as we want. But not all Thymosin beta-4 is created equal. And so I did create a video that you'll want to watch, and it's the side effects that can come from using TB-500, Thymosin beta-4. Click on the link below and I'll see you in that video.